Hey everybody, so today's topic's a little deep, it's a little heavy. We're going to be exploring slavery in Isekai Anime. I'll go into some definitions in a little bit, but first I have to say, one, I know that I'm going to get a lot of things wrong, so if I get anything wrong, I feel free to let's talk about it. Just tell me in the comments and we can have a conversation. This is obviously a point of view and of mine, and the artist can do whatever that they wish. If they wish to add slavery in their anime for no apparent reason, that's their prerogative. Just know that if it's for no reason, that their fans or people that are casually watching will have something to say about it. And this is the give and take of free speech, I suppose. And lastly, remember, this is not a direct comparison. This is more about a conversation that history has with art, talking about what happens when society and culture are affected by the same historical incident, and we start to see the repeating, the echoing of these phenomena. It's really fascinating. We're going to talk about national memory. We're going to talk about comfort women, which is such a sad and deep and sorrowful topic. We're going to talk about isekai and the numbers, what it is, and just stay tuned. You're going to love it. So let's go through some definitions before we start. What is an isekai? An isekai is an anime that involves a rebirth or kind of summoning from another world. So basically, a person gets either hit by a truck or summoned to another world, and they have to figure out their way. Sometimes they start from a baby, sometimes they're adults and either have to find their way back, or sometimes it's just like vibing in a new world. Actually, very oftentimes it's vibing in a new world. A lot of times in their previous lives, they're losers or what's called neets. And I think this has a huge role in kind of the conversations that isekai have with the world that they're in and the character. So basically, in a lot of circles, a lot of people know it as more of a loser genre, insofar as one of the creators of Mushoku Tensei, an anime I really like, said that this anime is for losers, and if you can't feel that, then it might not be for you, which is fair. But why did he get a slave?
ドワーフ6歳のジョージだ。
とりあえず会ってみましょうか。
こいつだな。あまりおすすめの商品とは言えねえ。
The fact that the protagonists in their previous lives are often neets is interesting because it does seem like they have an express aversion to capitalism in most of its forms. With the exception of consumption of cultural exports like food, figurines, and even video games, this consumption works as a remote nationalism that indirectly reflects a national sense of achievement on the global stage.
Yo! Tell me your ancient Japanese secret diet!
Well, I eat like human being instead of use food to cover feeling of emptiness.
Hey! That was cruel!
One of the things that isn't ever mentioned when people call isekai escapists is what they're escaping from. Things like intense work culture, social isolation, or economic inequality. The next definition that we have to define is fanservice. What is fanservice? Fanservice is quite simply, a lot of times, lewd or perverse, scantily clad, male or female characters that kind of got it going on, and you'll show little things that might show that they're a little sexy. A lot of the times the characters look or feel a little younger, or there are different rules in this world around the age of consent, and so all that has changed. And you know how fantasy worlds get really, really, really horny, because why not? And what's interesting about isekai is that even the worst ones get pretty decent ratings. So there's almost no risk-reward factor. Well, lots of reward, not a lot of risk, for making an isekai and pushing it forward. Of course, that has made the market flood with isekai. I mean, they're everywhere. And a lot more male than female, at least in the West, which is interesting to note. And a really fun fact is that Isekai represents more than 40% of Crunchyroll's dub output, which is crazy. The big question is, why does anime, Isekai in particular, have so much passivity when it comes to the issue of slavery? You see it time and time again in shows like Shield Reincarnation.
Begin. That slave crest branded on her chest makes it impossible for her to defy you.
30 silvers, right?
There's one extra in here.
That's your commission. You were going to wring it out of me anyway now, weren't you? Tell me your name. I said, what's your name?
I'm called Raftalia.
Let's go.
So we really did choose her. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
The character doesn't try to become a better person, whereas he uses slavery as a vehicle to become a better warrior. It's all about power. And these power dynamics are often flexed through the buying of a slave. They'll have the slave, and almost instant in some cases, the slave will then become their best friend or lover even. In fact, they'll add them to what's called a harem.
You'll keep on fighting as my sword, won't you?
Yes, of course I will, Master Naomi. Hey, that's no fair. I want a hug, Master. Come on, get in on this, Mel. No thanks, I'll pass.
So in effect, this conversation is supposed to be about the back and forth between history and art and those who have the power to affect both. When you have that kind of power, but you choose to obfuscate, these can cause echoes throughout time. And what we start to see with Isekai is almost a microcosm of an atrocity done by the Japanese people post World War II.
60年前は引きこもっていた国とは思えないほどたった数十年で大国にまでのし上がった東洋の強国性格は少し世間知らずだが勤勉で真面目手先が器用空気を読んで発言を控えるつつましさ口癖は
前処します。また今度考えます。答えは全部いいえです。
After World War II, Japan turned into a culture where everything was informed by World War II. Japan ceased to be Japan and started being post-World War II Japan. Japanese history became pre-World War II Japanese history. So too the novels, films, and manga created after World War II became post-World War II texts, regardless if they related to the war or not. They could be about the war, or about Japanese culture after the war, or a reflection of pre-war imperial pastoral Japan, where texts produced before the war were automatically pre-war. They became consciously escapist, or nostalgic, or historical. Animation in Japanese culture has a long history. Though most of early animated Japanese film were lost after the 1923 Tokyo earthquake, and you can see the clear dichotomy between before and after the war. Whereas before the war, we have films that are really firmly Japanese and rooted in Japanese culture, although they were competing with the likes of Disney, so they had to try and compete on a global stage still. Versus after, where the war is really the main focus in things like Astro Boy. Animators such as Mitsuyo Seo, however, did bring Japanese animation up to the level of foreign work by introducing cell animation. Mitsuyo Seo was in fact progressive, although he was involved in many propaganda films like so many people of the era. And so you can really see how attitudes towards America especially have changed from before and after the war and America's occupation. Going forward, this would have a huge impact on how anime would be created, and we start to see things like Akira, which is a post-war reflection on, well, World War II. Just as 80s anime like Akira were largely sci-fi based on the horrors of the nuclear missiles that dropped in Japan and reflect the destruction and rebuilding of Japan plus the horrors of the war, modern isekai is a westernized escapist fantasy harkening to the post-World War II time where globalized Japan thrived economically and anime was becoming the leading cultural export of their meteoric rise. The anxieties inside isekai are usually surrounded around being a better, more productive person than they were in their previous lives. It does feel like there is a wanting to go back to pre-war Japan, but through a globalized lens. What's interesting to note is that many anime focus on the victimhood of Japan and not the wronghoods perpetrated by their fellow countrymen, which creates a national narrative that hides the shame of the human rights violations that the Japanese did to their enemies.
The experience of service girls in the post-war occupied Japan is also unspoken. It belongs to the shameful memory of defeated Japan, which people wanted to suppress and forget. Those women were mobilized to serve occupiers with sexual service by the government so as to protect decent women. They were only prostitutes but also war widows, breadwinning daughters, and girls who lost families by strategic bombing of all the classes.
Isekai, I think, are a few generations removed from that. And there are many examples of some that either don't have slavery or have slavery and have somebody outraged by it. But in many cases, there are characters who interact with slavery in a very transactional nature.
女の奴隷を買いに行くぞ。
いやいや、王もお盛んな年頃じゃし、男なら致し方ないことじゃよ。
Which brings to mind some things said about the white moderate by Martin Luther King.
The white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice.
When you can look at oppression and keep it pushing, it begs the question who our protagonists are, right? Are they the good guys they think they are? And if not, then why doesn't the plot reflect that? Why aren't we going a step deeper? If we aren't going a step deeper, then why have the slavery at all? Some people like to say that it's because it's historical. Well, it's a cartoon. None of it is historical. None of it is historical. Some are kind of based off of history, but none of it is a documentary. And so the choice to add slavery in your art is always intentional. And to make an intentional choice like that, remember that these mangaka have to draw painstakingly these slaves over and over and over again. And so that's a conscious choice they're making.
We shall never completely understand the Japanese mind, but then they don't understand ours either. Otherwise, there would never have been a Pearl Harbor.
Slaves were not very common in Japan. It was banned in 1590, but around World War II, the government got in their minds that the men needed to get some of their stress out.
There is exemption of responsibility by perpetrators due to the masculine myth of uncontrollable sexual desire. That means men are the slaves of their sexual desire. You can't believe it.
Along with that sexual stress and tension that they thought that the Japanese soldiers were having, they also had assumed that STIs were too prevalent. So at first they started with Japanese women, and they took the Japanese women and they promised them that they'd be helping the war effort, and, you know, coercive perhaps, but not exactly slavery. But then when they get to places like Korea and China, they were kidnapping people, and it wasn't great. The people who were enslaved lived in squalor. The goal ended up being moot because the Comfort Women program, which was funded by the government and put up by the government, ended up increasing STIs and increasing sexual violence, obviously. And so as time goes on, Japan hides it and isn't very forthcoming about it.
400名の慰安婦を集めてほしいと要求したと。したがって、それ要求に応じるという内容が書かれています。 内務省警保局が各府県知事に命じて、その各府県の警察に業者を選ばせ、それからその業者に女性たちを集めさせて、中国南部に送り出すというものです。
Journalists like Yoshiaki Yoshimi has done major research on comfort women and have really come and unequivocally have stated that yes, the Japanese government did put people up into these comfort stations to essentially be enslaved and violenced against over it and over again. Since the comfort station travesty, the Japanese government has more or less flip-flopped on whether they were or were not really in charge during that time.
I respond Japanese way. Be unclear. Say one thing, but mean something else completely opposite. Like I'll think about it. Write to them.
So in 1993, there comes out something called the Kono Statement. And the Kono Statement talks all about the fact that the government was involved. Japanese took it very seriously and started to kind of walk back some of the more crazy reactions they were having to journalists and historians who were referring to it.
The judges find that the emperor had command responsibility for the crimes of sexual violence committed by the Japanese military. The emperor was the de facto and the de jure head of the state of Japan, and as such had ultimate command authority over the government and military.
There has been a Japanese kind of upswell since the beginning against what the Japanese government have been doing to obfuscate the history of the comfort woman. One great example is Saburo Ayanaga, and this is a quote from a paper about Ayanaga. While Ayanaga is not a well-known figure in Western academia, he is a relatively prominent public figure in Japan. Originally a religious historian, he's not only known as a scholar, but also as a political activist who became deeply involved in public history education. He is best known for Ayanaga vs. Ministry of Education, which lasted for a total of 32 years from 1965 to 1997, marking the longest civil trial in Japanese history. Although he lost all 3 trials, he is often praised as one of the most historic leftist scholars in post-war Japanese history. However, Shinzo Abe, the guy who got Fallout 4 with the weirdest little gun you've ever seen, did a review on the Kono Statement, which he was very admonished for publicly.
On one hand, you said you denied history. You denied the comfort issue of comfort woman. On the other hand, you're talking about you felt so pleased to reach agreement between the Japanese government and the Republic of Korea. According to you, if there's no such issue, why the Japanese government has to reach agreement with the Republic of Korea, and why there is the Japanese government issued a Kono Statement in 1993, which acknowledged the first time that some administratives and military members were directly involved in recruiting the women, including tens of thousands of South Koreans who were forced to provide sex for Imperial Japanese troops before and during the World War II.
So just like in the same way that slavery was illegal in Japan, but through a very government-funded way, they ended up going to another land to find a loophole into slavery to force their will upon younger women who do not have any rights of their own. The same thing is happening in Isekai. It's an echo of the same story, where our main characters go back into a different world and find a young woman who is enslaved, that's on a different land, who has to be subservient to them and help their party and love them and be all over them, and it's a microcosm. And this is what happens when governments hide stuff from people. The people actually start to forget, and the sentiments start to show themselves in their own society in smaller ways.
Humans living within modern day capitalism, especially post-war American consumer society, such people should be philosophically regarded as not humans, but animals, because they are completely satisfied and controlled and surrounded with many industrial goods, giving them pleasure without any human, historical, or dialectical self-consciousness and conflict.
And when you start to add in all these little pieces of characters into disparate things, we start to lose the grand narrative of the story. And with that loss of the grand narrative becomes being flippant about things that could affect your world and your character in interesting ways, but instead you're using them as either a set piece or as just another person in the harem.
We should put this observation in more global context. It is not the limited case with Japanese otaku. For example, please remind Peter Thiel, I mentioned before, several times. He also wanted to reconstruct the grand narrative, the border between the political and the non-political.
The Japanese government's obfuscation of what happened to comfort women is really a direct result of shame and blame that they put on comfort women themselves.
In the post-war stage, war gives a lifelong traumatic memory, lifelong stigmatization, which are silenced. In some cases, it belongs to open secret in the community where everyone knows what happened to whom, followed by the collective forgetting. Because the patriarchal paradigm put the shame on victims, in addition to that of the family, the community, and the state, which cannot protect their women. This is what happened to survivors to keep them silent.
And there is a causal effect, an echoing, if you will, of that exact same sentiment in these isekai animes. When you combine the really casual way that these characters and the world view slavery and the way that they view fan service combines to recreate this story in a fantastical setting using the loophole, the same logic from the loophole that created Comfort Woman in the first place. This is what happens when the conversation with history and art kind of goes sideways. When one of them isn't being completely honest, it affects the other one and how they tell their stories. I just thought it was a really interesting find, and I wanted to share with you all. So let me know what you think. It's a little heavy, but I think ultimately it was good to learn about Comfort Women and Japanese culture and society. There's a lot more that I haven't said, so if you want me to go more into this topic, then let me know. I'm going to be moving on to another interesting topic, so it might be in 2 or 3 videos if I find that people like it. Thanks for watching this far. This was really crazy to make, so thanks for staying with me. See ya.